I first met Bianca Jagger at the Intercontinental Hotel in Managua in February 1983. The moment is etched upon my mind because once you've met Bianca, you don't forget it in a hurry. And already in that time, she was toiling for the rights of oppressed people in Nicaragua, which was going through the aftermath of a very, very difficult time. It had a revolution, Sandinista revolution, following the dictatorship of the Somozas and the rest of it. And she struck me as, obviously I met her thinking she had been married to somebody famous, but that became absolutely irrelevant because she was already very, very much her own woman and a leader in her field. There weren't many people. There was the wonderful CAIR, the Catholic Institute for International Relations. There were other organizations around in Central America, but there were very few people doing the sort of work that she was doing then. Well, subsequently, she has set up the Bianca Jagger Human Rights Foundation, and I should say what it does, because it aims to bring the rights of present and future generations to the center of policymaking and to develop a legal framework that will hold chief executives and management of companies and all the rest to be accountable for grave human rights abuses and irreparable environmental destruction. So green she is too. She's just come in from Warsaw, where she was at the UN Climate Change Conference, where she contributed pretty extensively. But she is a one-band person in a very odd sort of way, and the band keeps playing year after year, no less strongly and no less loudly than it did the year before. And she's got one other terrific achievement. She is about to become one of the youngest great-grandmothers known to personkind. Bianca Jagger.
Thank you, John, for your kind words. It means a lot to me to have you introduce me. John is one of my heroes. For years, his courageous and insightful reporting has shone a light on issues of human rights, justice, and on every critical issue we are facing in the world. John is a voice of reason in the media, and you know how extraordinary his contribution to highlighting what was happening or the crimes that were committed in Sri Lanka was. If it wasn't for him, I don't believe that the rest of the media and the rest of the attention in this country would have been focused the way it did. It was thanks to John. Thank you, John. I would like to thank the Longford Trust for inviting me to speak today. It is a pleasure and a privilege to be delivering this lecture. The Longford Trust, as you have seen and you have heard early on, affects real changes in people's life. It offers opportunities and hope. Lord Longford, which unfortunately I didn't have the pleasure to have met, was a man of principle, a formidable man. I greatly admire his commitment to penal reform. He believed passionately that every individual is capable of reform, rehabilitation, or, as he preferred to put it, redemption, once we stop believing that, he said, we are giving up on our own humanity. And he was a champion of women, the husband of Elizabeth Longford, who was one of the first women to stand for Parliament in 1935, the father of the talented, high-achieving quartet of daughters, Antonia, Rachel, Judith, and Catherine. I would like to thank the trustees of my foundation, and I have the great pleasure to have here Baroness Helena Kennedy, who has been a great supporter, and she is one of my role models in life. And so thank you, Helena, for being here. I'd like to thank Mark Stevens, which I don't know if he's here, but if he's not, he's greatly missed. And I would like as well to thank Catriona Ward, who works with me and who is indispensable in anything I ever achieve for the foundation. Thank you, Kat. I have thought long and hard about the issue I will address today, ending violence against women and girls and the culture of impunity. I don't want to recite an endless litany of shocking statistics at you or offer glib solutions. I will outline the extent of the vast problem we face, the prevalence of violence against women and girls all over the world. I will also mention some current measures being implemented to address it. I will discuss the situation here in the UK, and lastly, I will share my vision of the future I want, where gender equality prevails, of a world free from gender-based violence, and make some recommendations for how we may achieve this vision. But first, I would like to tell you a little about myself and the experiences which drove me to commit my life to speaking up for women's rights. I was born in Managua, Nicaragua. My parents divorced when I was 10 years old. My mother found herself single, without a profession, and with 3 small children to care for. I witnessed my mother being discriminated against because of her gender and her status as a divorced working woman. Divorce was rare in the Nicaragua of the 60s. There was a stigma attached to it. During those difficult years, she exhibited great courage and strength. She believed in women's emancipation at a time when women were regarded as a second-class citizen and were expected to devote themselves exclusively to homemaking. My mother was my role model. I admire her independence and determination to achieve her goal. She never gave up. Since then, conditions have improved for women in Nicaragua and throughout the world. Women are excelling in many fields. We have almost achieved equal pay in some countries. We have different lives than those of our grandmothers and even our mothers. But gender equality is far from achieved. We still face unconscionable levels of discrimination and violence. The stark reality is that women are still a vulnerable group. For nearly 3 decades, I have campaigned for human rights, social justice, and environmental protection throughout the world. I have been speaking up for women's rights for most of my adult life. I founded the Bianca Jagger Human Rights Foundation, the BJHRF, in 2006 to be a force for change and a voice for the most vulnerable members of society. The BJHRF is dedicated to defending human rights, achieving social justice, speaking up for future generations, and addressing the threat of climate change. We are at a pivotal time for women's rights and human development. Nicholas D. Kristof, Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times journalist, has written, "In the 19th century, the central moral challenge was slavery. In the 20th century, it was the battle against totalitarianism. We believe that in this century, the paramount moral challenge will be the struggle for gender equality around the world." And I couldn't agree with him more. How are we doing in tackling the central moral challenge of the 21st century? We have been talking about women's rights and ending violence against women and girls for a long, long time. The English reformer Caroline Norton, calling for reforms of law governing domestic violence against women in 1854, wrote, "I desire to prove not my suffering or his injustice, but that the present law of England cannot prevent any such a suffering or control any such injustice." The Commission on the Status of Women, CSW, the principal global policy-making body dedicated exclusively to gender equality and advancement of women, was established in 1946. The first World Conference on the Status of Women was convened by the UN in Mexico City to coincide with the 1975 International Women's Year. In September of 1981, the Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women was ratified. There have been 3 further conferences: Copenhagen in 1980, Nairobi in 1985, and Beijing in 1995. The Beijing Platform for Action laid out the measures for national and international action for the advancement of women, to enhance the social, economic, and political empowerment of women, improve their health and their access to education, and promote their reproductive rights. The action plan set targets, committing nations to carry out concrete actions in health, education, decision-making, and legal reforms, with the ultimate goal of eliminating all forms of discrimination against women in both public and private life. The conference resolved to address the deeply entrenched attitudes and practices which perpetuate inequality in all parts of the world. Today, nearly 20 years later, how many of those targets have been accomplished? Have we rid ourselves of these deeply entrenched attitudes and practices? Sadly, I don't believe we have. I suppose you could argue that we have achieved gender equality on paper in the developed world. We can vote, we can own property, we can own and run businesses, we can be elected to parliament, we can even have a prime minister that is a woman. What more do we want? But there is a difference between non-discrimination and achieving gender equality. In human rights terminology, non-discrimination is defined as the absence of a discriminatory legal framework, and that policies are not discriminatory in effect. Achieving gender equality, however, is another matter. What UN Women calls substantive equality goes much further. It is overcoming entrenched gender bias in society. Substantive equality is concerned with the effects of law, policies, and practices to ensure that they do not maintain or reinforce existing disadvantages. I want to talk to you about something that I think is very telling, is the missing MDG target. When the international community convened in 2000 to establish the Millennium Development Goals, they left out one critical target. They failed to address the global pandemic of violence against women and girls. The United Nations Development Fund for Women, UNIFEM, refers to the elimination of violence against women and girls as the missing MDG target. The BJHRS has launched a global campaign calling on world leaders to achieve the missing MDG target, ending violence against women and girls and the culture of impunity, to address the systemic problems of discrimination and achieve gender equality. I hope that you will support the BJHRF efforts. Violence against women is one of the most prevalent human rights violations in the world. It happens in every country and at every level of society. The 2005 World Health Organization report, Addressing Violence Against Women and Achieving the Millennium Development Goals, states, until recently, most governments have considered violence against women to be a relatively minor social problem. Today, violence against women is recognized as a global concern. One of the most pervasive violations of human rights in all societies. It exists on a continuum from violence perpetrated by an inmate partner to violence as a weapon of war. Violence against women is a major threat to social and economic development. Today, 8 years after that, the WHO report, Violence Against Women continues to undermine effort to reach the MDG targets according to the UN. The failures of governments to protect the rights of women continues to hinder the promotion of gender equality and the empowerment of women all over the world. The consensus is clear. Our capacity to achieve the 8 MDG targets by 2015 is inextricably linked to our ability to tackle the missing target. Our failure to address it will prevent us from achieving the other MDGs. The 57th session of the UN Commission on the Status of Women in March 2013 affirmed that violence against women and girls is rooted in historical and structural inequality in power relations between women and men, and persist in every country in the world as a pervasive violation of the enjoyment of human rights. Let me please have some water. Governments are preparing a new framework to follow the MDG targets in 2015, and they intend to include the missing MDG in this new framework. But can we afford to wait until 2015? No, I don't believe we can. We must act now. And I keep going to governments and I keep asking, why will we have to wait for 2 more years? I will now briefly outline the situation we face. Each one of these statistics is shocking. Together, they are horrific. The United Nations Development Fund for Women estimate that at least 1 in every 3 women in the world has been beaten, coerced into sex, or otherwise abused. In some countries, the rate is as high as 70%. Globally violent is a greater threat to women aged 15 to 44 than cancer, traffic accidents, malaria, and war combined. Every 6 hours, a woman is killed by her partner in South Africa. 574 women and girls were murdered in Guatemala during 2012. Conviction rate for these murders are between less than 1% and 4%. Rife with drug and gun crimes, Ciudad Juarez in Mexico has been called the murder capital of the world. Between 1993 and 2012, 1,234 women were reported murdered. No one knows how many murders have gone unreported. According to the New York Times, the woman's body are often dumped in mass graves outside of the city, mutilated, showing signs of torture and sadistic sexual assault. In some countries, the murder of women is enshrined in law. In Iran, Sudan, and Saudi Arabia, among others, women can still be punished for the crimes of adultery or sex outside marriage by beheading, stoning, and hanging under Sharia law. Who can forget the shocking and sickening video which emerged in 2012, showing a woman in an Afghan village being shot 9 times in the back with an AK-47 as dozens of men looked on cheering. A man reads verses from the Quran condemning adultery, saying, "We cannot forgive her. God tell us to finish her." In Jamama, Somalia, a young woman accused of having out-of-marriage sex was stoned to death in a football stadium in 2012. Across India, 8,391 dowry death cases were reported in 2010. That means a bride was burned every 90 minutes, according to statistics recently released by the National Crime Record Bureau in India. These numbers indicate a culture of impunity, of tolerance of violence against women all across the world. Sometimes sanctioned by the state, it is abhorrent that in the 21st century, such a killing are allowed to continue. And you probably think it can't be possible. This cannot be happening. But this is what is happening in many parts of the world. National judicial systems often lack adequate financial and human resources to handle sexual assault and violence against women. And there is often a lack of will to do so. Women rarely have the same resources, political rights, authority, or control over their environment and needs that men do. The Independent Expert Assessment for Uniform Rights in Women, War and Peace, they do not have access to assistance, protection, or support. Violence feeds on the widespread, insidious cultural perception that women are inferior. As the recent report by the House of Commons International Development Committee states, priority must be accorded to intervention that focus on changing social norms that condone violence against women and girls. My friend Amartya Sen, professor of economics and philosophy at Harvard, showed the devastating consequences of the neglect women face all over the world in his revolutionary paper, More Than 100 Million Women Are Missing. He writes, the higher rates of disease from which women suffer, and ultimately to the relative neglect of females, especially in healthcare and medical attention. These numbers tell us quietly a terrible story of inequality and neglect leading to the excess mortality of women. An estimate 50 million women are missing from the Indian population, having been lost to infanticide, abortion, or child neglect. 50 million. In certain regions of India, the practice of sex-selective abortion or killing girl babies in favor of boy is shockingly familiar one. The deadly preference for male offspring is already having an effect on the population. The boy-girl ratio has changed across the country, and in 1991, the census figure was 947 girls to 1,000 boys. 10 years later, it has fallen to 927 girls for 1,000 boys. Today, it stands at 914 girls to every 1,000 boys, and it is still sinking. Tragically, this attitude is not unique to India. More and more girls and women are disappearing every year in India, Pakistan, China, many countries in Africa and other parts of the world, because they are considered less valuable, less culturally and economically useful than men. Women acquiesce or are forced to be complicit in these femicides across the world. And what about rape and sexual assault? They are endemic in our societies. Globally, 60 million girls are sexually assaulted on the way to school each year. Many of you may have heard of the tragic case of Nirbhaya in India last December. A 23-year-old student returning home from the cinema one evening was violently and repeatedly gang raped on a bus, sustaining horrific internal injuries. Afterwards, she was thrown naked and unconscious from the moving vehicle. The student was nicknamed Nirbhaya, meaning fearless. In the Indian press, for her determination to live and see her attackers prosecuted. Nirbhaya died of her injuries in December 29, 2012. Something changed in me that day. I learned about Nirbhaya. I felt sick and revolted when I read of her suffering. It reaffirmed my determination to speak out against violence against women. I was encouraged by the reaction to Nirbhaya's case in India. It galvanized public opinion. Probably it galvanized more than it has in some other countries. Women and men stood up demanding legislation to protect women. The Indian Committee on Amendment to Criminal Law, headed by Justice J.S. Verma, produced a remarkable report containing comprehensive analysis and recommendations that not only for improving responses and procedures for sexual assault in India, but overall strategies to improve the status of women. The report reveals corruption in the police and the government and institutionalized apathy towards violence and deeply ingrained misogyny. It states unequivocally that the police are involved in trafficking of children and that authentic figures of missing children in India are not available for obvious reason of the complicity of law enforcement agencies. Children have been driven into forced labor, sex abuse, sexual exploitation, as well as made victims of illegal organ trade. The report condemns the demeaning and inhumane treatment that rape victims sometimes receive in India at the hands of the police and doctors. The report is a call to action. It proposes transformative amendments to the law to better protect women and girls and to promote gender equality. It calls for the criminalization of marital rape and for the government to bring sexual crime by members of the armed forces under the jurisdiction of criminal law. It makes recommendations to address the deeply entrenched gender bias in the Indian police force. It overhauls medical and forensic procedures for victims of sexual assault and suggests provision for trafficked children and vulnerable women. The reason why I have focused on this report is because it is a groundbreaking report. If the recommendations in this report were implemented, they could improve the lives of millions of women and girls. They could lay the foundation for a systemic change in Indian society and institution. But I can think of many other countries which could benefit from the recommendations of the Indian Committee on Amendments to Criminal Law. Unfortunately, the Indian government has so far failed to adopt many of these recommendations. I urge Prime Minister Manmohan Singh and his government to take immediate action. But let's come back to the UK, because many of you may say to me, well, that is happening in developing country. That doesn't happen here. Well, let me read you some numbers. It's common misconception that sexual violence on this scale happens only in the developing world. I'm afraid to say that sexual violence against women is a global crisis, and the developed world is not exempt. Last year in the UK, around 60,000 women were raped. Over 400,000 women were sexually assaulted. 1.2 million women suffered domestic abuse, according to the Home Office. But shockingly, according to the Crown Prosecution Service, there were only 5,651 prosecutions for rape and 111,891 for domestic violence in England and Wales. Why is such a small proportion of rape and sexual assault cases prosecuted? There is a culture of silence and shame surrounding sexual assault. Only 1 in 10 is reported in the UK. The victims is often the only witness and almost always has to go to court. Many women are afraid to speak out in cases of rape and domestic abuse. Most rape victims cannot face the process of a trial. Accountability on the part of states and societies for crimes against women means more than just having legal mechanisms available to punish perpetrators. We have to enforce them. Impunity weakens the foundation of societies. We live in a world where rape has long been used as a weapon of war, and violence against women in conflict has reached epidemic proportion. In 1993, I went to the former Yugoslavia to document the mass rape of Bosnian women by Serbian forces as part of their campaign of ethnic cleansing. Nothing, I can tell you, in my experience as a human rights campaigner had prepared me for the horror and suffering I witnessed and the testimonies I heard. UNIFEM estimate that during the Bosnian War, up to 50,000 women were systematically raped. Today, there are only been 30 convictions for these rapes. And these 50,000 women cannot go forward with their lives because there have been no accountability. During the 1994 Rwanda genocide, it is estimated that between 250,000 to 5,000 women were raped. Rape is used as a weapon of war to humiliate, to punish, to demean, to break communities and families apart. Women have become the biggest victims of war. The UNIFEM Independent Expert Assessment writes, in Women, War, and Peace, the extreme violence that women suffer during conflict does not arise solely out of the conditions of war. It is directly related to the violence that exists during women's life during peacetime. You know, I sometimes hesitate whether I should continue to tell you and read to you these horrific statistics. But perhaps it's important that I let you know what is happening in the world, because this is all in some way hidden. In some way, we don't want to know that it is happening. Being assaulted by a partner is the most common kind of violence experienced by women. Nearly 40% of women killed worldwide are slain by an intimate partner, according to the UN. Those who perpetrate violence against women should be prosecuted with the full weight of the law. But how much weight does the law carry? Not much in many parts of the world. And even in our society, it doesn't carry as much weight as it should. Domestic violence is acceptable, even legal in some countries. More than 600 million women live in countries where domestic violence is not considered a crime, according to the UN. The highest court of the United Arab Emirates ruled in 2010 that under Sharia law, a man is permitted to beat his wife and children as long as he leaves no mark. A judge in Saudi Arabia stated in 2009 that a man has a right to hit his wife who spent money wastefully. Well, I can imagine many of us who may be beaten up and sanctioned by the courts. Even in countries where violence against women is illegal, spousal abuse, rape, and sexual violence are often ingrained in the culture. The numbers aren't encouraging. The more I learned about the issue, the more appalled and disturbed I am by the global failure to address the problem of violence against women and girls. It is systemic and institutionalized, and I think that's really what we need to look at, is systemic and institutionalized. When I spoke on violence against women at the Google, this is an experience I have. And I didn't say anything at the time, but I think it's important that I tell you about it. I was asked to speak at a Google Zeitgeist conference in London earlier this year. The organizers tried to censor my speech. They told me, you know, we don't want that you give us such a hardcore statistics. Can you change it, have a positive ending? And I went and I sat and I thought of every possible way to try to have a positive ending to the speech I was going to give. They wanted me to soft pedal the statistic. They said the audience was mainly men, and they weren't ready for the shocking facts. But I believe that men are ready to look at the facts in the face. And I will tell you this little incident. I was supposed to give a speech, and they say, no, you better sit with a very prominent newscaster who is a friend of mine, and you can have a conversation with him. And I thought, okay, you know, I can either go and tell the media about it and expose them, or I can shut up and just do what they said. And I said, give me just 5 minutes. And I went and I read my speech. And I remember some of the important statistics. So my friend asked me the first question, and I gave the speech as much as I could remember. But what was important was that afterwards, I could have gone to my room and hide away. I went to the dinner, and men came to me and said, thank you very much for telling us about, you know, the situation of violence against women. You know, we need to know more. and we need to know what we can do. And that's where we are wrong, when we think that men are not prepared to listen and that they will not be prepared to be part of changing the conditions of women. I will be wrong if I left out female genital mutilation, because there is 100 to 140 million girls all over the world, predominantly in Africa, that have been subjected to female genital mutilation. A 2007 analysis estimates that more than 66,000 women in the UK have undergone FGM, with some 24,000 girls at risk. In the UK, there has been not a single conviction for FGM in the 30 years since it was made illegal. I welcome the upcoming Home Affairs Select Committee inquiry into the lack of conviction for FGM in the United Kingdom. It is urgent and long overdue. We can be sure that all of these numbers are only the tip of the iceberg. Much violence against women goes unreported. But I want to ask you, because I asked myself this question, what is the cause of this global pandemic of violence against women and girls? Is it caused by deeply entrenched societal norms? In some countries, discrimination against women is enshrined in law and persists. In others, supposedly egalitarian nations, veiled, underhand, unspoken. Worldwide, education is fraught with gender bias. 70 million girls each year are denied the right to the most basic education. 64% of the 774 million illiterate adults worldwide are women. Education is critical to emancipating women and girls from poverty, in achieving gender equality, and towards the creation of a free and equal world. It is the golden key to unlocking potential and creating equal opportunity for all. All countries must achieve gender parity in education. No one knows this better than Malala Yousafzai, who risked her life speaking out for women's education. Her commitment and vision have earned her the Sakharov Prize at the age of 16. I can think of no one more deserving. The Sex Discrimination and Equal Pay Act came into force in the UK in 1975. Today, women in this country are paid on an average 15% less than their male counterparts. The hourly rate pay for men is 26.54, and for women, 18.32, with the disparity even wider in part-time jobs. 2013 marks the 50th anniversary of the passing into law of the Equal Pay Act by John Kennedy in the US. We have yet to achieve economic justice for women who are still paid less than men in the US, in this country, and throughout the world. Discrimination is not merely a moral evil, it is explicitly against the law. Institutions and business, employers everywhere, those who are in the greatest position of responsibility, have a duty to observe the law, to ensure equal pay for women. I urge business leaders here and throughout the world to make the workplace fair. Gender equality and equal pay are enshrined in national and international law, but they are not the everyday reality for women all over the world. There are too few women in positions of power today. Of the 190 head of states in the world, 17 are women. Of all the people in parliament in the world, 21% are women. In the UK, there are 147 female MPs and 503 male MPs. In the corporate sector, only 16% of those on boardroom levels are women. We are deluding ourselves if we think we have eradicated discrimination from the so-called developed world. I fear that under the surface of our Western, democratic, egalitarian societies, embedded deep in our cultures, it still lurks an institutionalized belief that women are inferior. In the words of the Beijing platform, which I mentioned earlier, there lurk deeply entrenched attitudes and practices which perpetuate inequality and discrimination against women. And when I talk about the media, let me tell you a little thing that really surprised me when I read it. I was astonished when many UK newspapers carried headlines stating that Andy Murray was the first British winner of Wimbledon Tennis Championship in 77 years. Have they forgotten that there were 4 other British single champions in the past 77 years? Dorothy Round-Little won the women's singles in 1937. Angela Mortimer won in 1961. Anne Haydon-Jones in 1969, and Virginia Wade won in 1977. Apparently, as women, our victories don't count. Is there a wish to diminish us, to ignore our achievements, to belittle us? I would like to know, because it is time that it changed. I'm about to become a great-grandmother. This begs the question, what do I want the world to look like for my granddaughters and great-grandchild? What can we do in the next decades to ensure that when my great-grandchild is grown, gender violence is a thing of the past? I have a vision for the future I want. In this future, we have achieved gender equality, ended violence against women and girls, and the culture of impunity. We have achieved the missing MDG target. We live in a democracy where justice prevails, an inclusive society based on the principles of equality, freedom, and security. Women are a political force in every country at the negotiating tables, and their voices count in peace process, judicial, and civil infrastructures. They have equal opportunity in all sectors and at every level of society, and are paid the same as men. In my vision, we have reviewed all civil and labor laws and introduced land reforms to eliminate discrimination against women. Empowering women will make a material difference to our lives. It will reduce poverty and hunger. For instance, women farmers make up to about half of the agricultural force in developing countries, and this number is increasing, but they suffer discrimination and lack access to resources. If we give these women farmers access to seeds, equipment, and resources, if we empower them, we could end hunger for 150 million people worldwide, according to UN Women. I'm not only calling on women to achieve this vision. We need men and women to work together to create a world where we walk hand in hand and where we achieve these changes. How do we get there? There are minimum standards we need to meet in order to achieve my vision. We must establish the legal mechanism that will ensure the protection of women from violence, sexual violence, and promote gender equality around the world. We must develop the mechanism to enforce the law, to bring the culprits to justice, and end the culture of impunity. We must eliminate all forms of discrimination against women in political, economic, public, and private life. We must empower more women, increase women leadership and participation in every sector of society, recognize them in the corridors of power, get them to the negotiating table, and make sure their voices are heard. Ensure equal rights of women to own and inherit property, sign a contract, register a business, and open a bank account. That seems to you maybe very remote, but it is not in many countries. Eliminate discrimination from the media and institutions, governmental, academic, financial, legal, from all sectors. Promote gender equality at all levels. Enforce stringent equal opportunities and equal pay legislation. ensure gender parity in education, increase women access to economic empowerment and opportunity, increase funding and budgets for initiatives which prevent violence, ridding our social and legal institution of bias, or ridding our social and legal institutions of bias, will be a painful, slow process, but we can do it. We must do it. We're not doing enough, and we are not doing it fast enough. It means ensuring funding and access for women to media and communication technology, giving them a forum for their points of view. It means revolutionizing the way women are presented in all forms of media. There is currently an ingrained gender bias towards women, a tendency to reduce us to stereotypes, sexualize us, infantilize us, deshumanize us, and condemn us. We have long accepted it, but why do we accept it? I don't think we should, and I think we should say no more. I have just returned from Warsaw, Poland, where I spoke on 2 panels at COP19, the UN Climate Conference. One was Vision 50-50, Women for Action on Climate Change, moderated by Christiana Figueres, Executive Secretary of the UNFCCC, with Helen Clark, UNDP Administrator for former President, who is a former President of New Zealand, Mary Robinson, former President of Ireland, Tarja Halonen, former President of Finland, and Lakshmi Puri, Deputy Executive Director of UN Women. Formidable, powerful, and accomplished women, leaders in their fields. They have expertise, wisdom, knowledge, and compassion, qualities we need in our leaders. We need more women leaders. The UN Women Position Paper, a transformative, a standalone goal on achieving gender equality, women's rights and women's empowerment, finds that the shortage of women in power has its root in an equal power relation in the family and community, which bring me to my point. Opinions, attitudes, and prejudice are learned at home. It is family that first influence a child's views of the world. We women cannot blame the patriarchy for all the wrongs of the world. We also raise our sons and daughters. We also influence the perception of the roles that men and women should play. We must teach our children respect for human rights, respect for women's rights, the meaning of gender equality. We have the opportunity and the power to counter centuries of age-old misogyny and prejudice. When I look back at my mother, I realize what a pivotal role she played in shaping who I am today. And to conclude, I want to say that this is a global problem, but we can make a difference together. We have a great collective power if we join forces. I call on women across the world to embark upon a nonviolence revolution, to rid our world of the scourge of gender-based violence. I hope that all the men of conscience will join us. Together we can end violence against women and girls and the culture of impunity. Together we can tackle deeply ingrained, pervasive, institutionalized discrimination. It will not be easy. I'm not saying it will happen overnight. We will need each and every one of you. What is clear is that we can't ignore the problems of violence against women and girls any longer. We owe it to women all over the world who are suffering violence, persecution, and injustice to stand up for the right. It is a crime against each and every one of us. It is not only we, but our daughters and granddaughters who will suffer by doing nothing. We jeopardize their future. Let's make our voices heard. Twitter is a great tool for social justice, and I'm not saying that that is the answer to everything, but it is invaluable. For me, it's an invaluable tool in my human rights and environmental campaigning. If you witness injustice, you can say something. Tweet about it. I'm on Twitter at Bianca Jagger. I would like to invite you to follow me. I would like to leave you with Abigail Adams' advice to her husband, US President John Adams, in 1776. She said, Remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Do not push such unlimited power into the hands of the husbands. Remember, all men will be tyrants if they could. If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation. I am ready to rebel, and I'm ready to call for a nonviolence revolution, and I hope you are too. Thank you very much. Thank you. You know how difficult it is when you have to give such a long speech with so many difficult statistics, and that you're wondering if you all going to say, we had enough, goodbye, and leave. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
There's an opportunity, a brief section of questions, if anybody would like to put a point. A few things struck me as we were going through. But anybody want to volunteer something from the audience? Some big challenges there, especially for men. There's a conference on men going to be held at the Festival Hall. It's called Time to Talk About Men. It's going to be in January. It is. Anybody? Yes. Can we have a microphone here, please? And then to the lady at the back. Yeah. The chap with the glasses, a green shirt. Lovely.
It's quite a simple question, given where we are. How important can the leaders of religion be in changing perspectives on gender equality?
Critical. And in fact, I should have mentioned that. We need to come together. Politicians, religious leaders, NGOs, grassroots organizations, everyone, but religious leaders are critical in promoting and helping us achieve this revolution.
Should we list the number of religions that have women at the very pinnacle of leadership?
No, you do.
Now, let me just think. Yes, well, we'll sort that one out afterwards. There's a question there, please. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that extraordinary speech that, as far as I'm concerned, has inspired me to do much more than I feel that I have done. I come from Syria. My name is Rana Kabani, and I'm a writer. And one of the most horrific things of the 43 years of totalitarianism that we have lived under in a century that now sees gender issues as the most important is that both these things, totalitarianism and the lack of gender equality, have combined in the Assad regime. And not recently only in the past 3 years that you have all heard about, but in 1982, when the city of Hama was massacred, and where the use of women and the gang rape of young girls of 6 was used as a war crime in order to break the men who were brought out and shot by the millions. This has been happening now in the past 2.5 years with children of prisoners, and we have maybe 350,000 prisoners being brought, girls being brought to be raped in front of their brothers and fathers in order to break them to confess to nothing except wanting freedom. and the horrific nature of the rapes, not only gang rapes, but I'm sorry to say, stuffing hungry rodents into the private parts of young girls has been one of the most horrific things in Syria, which has led to the displacement of 7 million people, mainly because not only of the destruction of 10 million houses, but also because they couldn't bear the idea that rape would happen to their children. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Two more questions which we'll take together, one there and one here. The lady with the red top as well. Mic to each. No? All right. Or we'll take you first then. Yeah. Far away.
What do I need to do? You mentioned that education begins at home. What is being done in our schools?
Well, of course, it is as important. I talked about the family and at home because it's rarely mentioned, because we rarely speak about the role that we mothers can play. But of course, it's at all levels of education, at all levels of institutions, and of course, the school is a critical one.
And the last question here, there's a microphone coming to you.
I've got one.
Oh, you got it, good.
Hello, Bianca. My name's Jason Rock from Learn to Listen, and following on from what the lady over there said, I've spoke to 35,000 school children in 30 boroughs out of 32 in London, and I often talk to the young people about choices and domestic violence amongst young people, and some of the young men's attitudes towards women these days is terrible, and I often remind the young boys of their mums and their sisters, and is something that I will continue to champion until I die. So, great respect. So,
Thank you very much. Well, thank you, Bianca, very much indeed. We're very grateful to you for coming tonight and for talking with such passion.
Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias a ti.